Hello and welcome to PRSay. I'm Veronica. Sopher, your host. This is the official podcast of the Houston Chapter for Public Relations Society of America, and we are an award-winning podcast. So thank you to all of our members who have participated and been on the show. It was a great first season, and we are thrilled to be coming back at you with more members to meet and connect with. So I've got another great one for you from the K-12 space that I'm going to introduce in just a second. But before I bring her on, I'm going to remind you to hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform if you're listening. And if you are watching on Facebook or YouTube, drop us some comments and my guest and I will be sure to connect with you. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get this episode kicked off by bringing on Caitlin Madison from IL Texas. Welcome, Caitlin.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited.
You bet. So tell us a little bit about how you got into PR. My guess is you've been doing it a little while now, but I certainly want to hear about your journey.
Yeah, so I went to school for journalism. I worked in local television news for a few years up in the Rochester, New York market. And then, like a lot of recovering journalists do, we transition into the communications and public relations space.
Yeah.
So prior to my move to Texas, I moved into nonprofits where I worked in communications and public relations. And then about almost 4 years ago now, I, on a whim, applied to International Leadership of Texas and was lucky enough to get the role and was able to come down and join this incredible school system.
That's awesome. And so you came from Rochester down to Texas. Are you originally from Texas?
I am not. So I grew up showing horses competitively, and I would come down to, I had a trainer in Tennessee, and then we would travel down to the Fort Worth area every year for some of our big horse shows. And so I always say my cute little story is that I fell in love with Texas when we drove from Tennessee down to Fort Worth, and we were on this RV bus, and somewhere between the top stair and the bottom stair, when we pulled into Fort Worth, I fell right out of the RV into the parking lot. And I kind of looked around and I said, I love it here.
Yeah.
This is where I'm going to move one day.
That's awesome.
Within a few years, that's where I ended up moving. And since then, my sister lives down here now. My mom lives down here now. So we are officially Texans.
Oh, I love it. Well, good. You got here as fast as you could, and that's all that matters.
Yep, that's right.
I love it. I love it. So, Caitlin, tell me a little bit about some of the transition. We do have a lot of members in PRSA who are former journalists. Most of us have journalism degrees. And so we've been on that side of the table. But now that you're on this side, or in your case, the camera, tell me a little bit about that transition, especially into the K-12 comm space.
Yeah, so never in a million years, if you had asked me if I was going to go into K-12, would I have said, yes, that's the route I'm going. But when I looked at transitioning, and I'm sure like a lot of folks do, you have a passion for telling stories and using your words and, you know, your storytelling ability to help people. And so I was able to do that in my previous job in a nonprofit where we served individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so it was a great kind of first step into how do we change the storytelling from the news side to the nonprofit or, you know, education side. And when I fell into education, there's so much more to it and so many more layers to it than I had initially, you know, ever really realized. So when you are in K-12, it's easy to say, okay, you're talking about, you know, fun student stories or fun teacher stories. And that's the kind of stuff you're pitching out. A lot of times in the morning news segments, you'll see some of the good news spotlights of what's going on in school systems across the state. And that's awesome. But there's a lot of other really kind of in-depth and just really meaty stories in K-12 education. And then on the other side of it too, it is education, it is schools. And so you're also doing some crisis communication stuff. Mm-hmm. You're doing, you know, you're mitigating risk. You're helping to make sure that you're in control of certain narratives and you're supporting your campuses. And so for someone who is thinking about transitioning out of news into K-12, one of the things that I really struggled with was I loved the fast-paced chaos of news. You know, there's a high that you get from it. It's adrenaline rushing. It's fun. And I was worried that I wouldn't be able to find that in a new setting. And then I realized, no, you can absolutely find that. And it's not an everyday thing, but that your old news instincts kick right in when there's a situation that needs to be controlled, or when, there may be something scary going on that you're not quite sure where the information's at. And all of that background in news just really serves you so well, because you have a sense of urgency that really it's hard to train. It's hard to have that if you don't come from news. And I think you just have kind of a really cool and level head when a lot of other people are in a panic.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
they're scared, and you can be that person that goes in and you're that solid rock in kind of a scary situation. And so that's one of my favorite things that I get to do. And it's an honor that I get to do it, is really kind of help support our campuses, our parents, our principals, whoever it might be, through some of those challenging situations that you might see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. It's like that prepares you for those crisis comms, and God forbid, but the reality is violence is something that we and the K-12 space have to be ready for, not only active shooters, but other kinds of crisis, bomb threats. Those are some of the day-to-day things that we deal with, regardless of the type of district you're in, and regardless of the size. And we all know that. And so we prepare for the worst and try to be ready. So I think you're right. Those instincts just kick right back in. And so we can help facilitate the management of the crisis, but then more importantly, manage the media relations and the messaging to families, because ultimately families need to feel confident that their children are as safe as they can be, or that everything is being done to protect them. And so those are some of the issues that we have to grapple with when we're on that side of it. And I love that you brought that up, because I don't think some of our colleagues in maybe the oil and gas space or in the corporate space realize that we are still almost like acting as journalists for half of the stuff that we do, and the other half responders from that PR perspective. So I love that you brought that up.
Absolutely. And I think too, it really helps you leverage those connections and the network you had in media, not just with the journalists and the news, but also when you're working with law enforcement, right? As a journalist, you work closely with public information officers, or just whatever law enforcement is involved in a certain situation. And because you have built that relationship from a news side, you've also got that relationship from a PR side now as well. And so I think that really helps facilitate more open communication. The questions to ask, some of the trigger points or keywords that if an officer is saying something, okay, this is serious, or what might not be quite as much of a concern. And so it really kind of helps you gauge a situation, and then better, like you say, better manage it for the organization.
Yeah. It sounds like you're doing a fantastic job. So how long have you been there now? Let me ask you that.
Yeah, so I've been with Isle, Texas for almost 4 years now. And
okay.
I came down right before COVID hit, November of 2019.
And then March came and it was a whole new job.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, before we wrap up, give me a couple of pointers you might give to some journalists who are out there contemplating going into school comms. What are some things that you would probably mention to them as they're thinking about that transition?
Yes. So it's one of those areas, like I said, I never in a million years would have seen myself in a K-12 space, but I think it's such a great avenue for journalists to transition into. I think you've got incredible stories every single day. Your kids are doing incredible things. Your teachers are doing incredible things. You get to be out at campuses. You're not tied to a desk. You're out, you're talking to people, you're hearing these incredible stories, and you're sharing them. No 2 days are the same. You do get those incredible, school holidays. You get those summer breaks, which coming out of news, it's such a great relief to have some of when you worked every night, every weekend, every holiday. That is one of the perks of it. But then I think it's also a great way to start to transition and develop the relationship between schools and news. Yeah. When I worked in news, there were a lot of school districts that were afraid to talk to news. And there would be this collective groan in the newsroom of, oh no, we've got to do a story with a school, because they were so hard to break into and build relationships with. And it's understandable, because a school has a responsibility to protect its kids and its staff members. But one of the really refreshing things about IL Texas is that our superintendent is very transparent with the media. He's very media friendly. And so from day one, I've been able to come in and really, engage with media and make sure that they know whether we're doing a fun fluff story or a more challenging story, or you're looking for a campus to shoot a story on, reach out to us, because we want to build that relationship. We want to help you just as much as, you need to get your story done. And we want to build that relationship so that if you need an expert, we can be there for you. And so I think it just really, really kind of starts to open up that bridge when you put journalists who have struggled with schools in the past, you put them in a school and suddenly they understand the other side of it a little bit more, but then they can help foster those relationships as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's great advice, and the point well made for sure. So, Caitlin, how can folks connect with you? What's the best way to reach you and stay networked?
Yes, find me on LinkedIn, just Caitlin Madison over on LinkedIn. I love, we've got 22 campuses throughout the state of Texas. 6 of those are in Houston, and we've got 2 more coming in Houston next year. So I am up and down the road on 45 all the time. I stop at every Buc-ee's between Dallas and Houston. And myself and my team, anytime we're down there, we really want to make sure that we're connecting with the PRSA Association down there, the chapter down there, connecting with reporters down there. So anytime, reach out. And if we are in the area, we would love to meet up with everyone.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to having you at one of our events in the future, and I can't wait to meet in person.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks for being on. All right, guys, that wraps up this episode of PRSay. Remember, you are listening to this podcast or watching this podcast so that you can connect with other members and really grow your network in the space. So, public relations, friends, make sure you tap all the links that we have got for you in the show notes so that you can stay connected. So I will wrap up this episode by thanking Caitlin for joining us. If you're listening on the podcast, make sure you hit subscribe. If you connected with us on Facebook or YouTube, drop us some comments and we will be sure to connect. And with that, I'll end this